US President Donald Trump is hastily withdrawing from Europe militarily. In recent days, there has been a sharp increase in drone incidents and explosions in Eastern Europe, from Finland to Moldova and from Bulgaria to Germany. And everywhere a Russian connection is being traced. The Finns are openly preparing for an inevitable drone attack by the Russians. Meanwhile, investigators in Germany have concluded that the drone carrying explosives, which was discovered the day before near a Ukrainian cargo plane at Leipzig airport, is directly linked to Moscow. And in Moldova, one of the drones exploded literally today, and at the same time the American army suddenly removed one of its key generals from command, who was responsible for US forces in Europe. And as for Poland, the US Army Brigade still hasn't arrived months after the announcement, even though its deployment was personally promised by Trump. In this episode, we'll break down each fact separately to understand what's really going on, because it's important here, as they say, not to panic ahead of time, but to calmly sort everything out. Because on one hand, there are alarming reports about the reduction of American troops in Europe, the dismissal of generals who, by the way, were involved in military aid issues for Ukraine. But on the other hand, there is a certain logic to these decisions. My name is Pechiy. Let's analyze this topic together. But before we start, please subscribe to this YouTube channel. We are moving towards the 300,000 subscriber mark, so I'd appreciate every subscription. So, as you probably already know, in Europe they have started talking more and more about preparing for war with the Russians and have begun recording an increase in strikes by unidentified drones. Let's start with Finland. The country's Minister of Defense, Antti Häkkänen, said today that Moscow will try to trigger an escalation or stage a provocation in the Baltic region, using Ukrainian drones captured as trophies. According to him, one of the goals of such an operation could be to weaken political, economic and military support for Ukraine from its allies, as well as to test the readiness of the North Atlantic Alliance. And now the Minister of Defense of Finland emphasized, quote, "We will have to be very vigilant. Even during the Cold War, the KGB in Russia organized such bizarre operations that, unfortunately, anything is possible." He also noted that even Russia's use of Ukrainian components will not allow them to disguise the operation under a false flag. But he emphasized that the use of military force against NATO would be a very serious step, which Moscow is well aware of. At the same time, an actual drone struck Bulgaria, and this is exactly the kind of hybrid pressure Russia is trying to exert on European countries. On the morning of August 8, an unidentified drone entered Bulgarian airspace from Romania and soon exploded near an international gas pipeline. The Bulgarian Ministry of Defense initially stated that it could have been a Ukrainian drone decoy called Maya, but the Chief of the General Staff of Bulgaria, Admiral Emil Eftimov, gave a much more restrained assessment. He personally visited the site of the explosion. By the way, the drone did not cause any damage even though it fell near the gas pipeline, and he stated, quote, "The question was whether it was a Shahed or not. It turned out that it was not. This incident is a consequence of military actions taking place near our borders. We are adjusting, adapting, and developing the necessary capabilities," and then Eftimov directly emphasized that there are no signs that the incident happened due to deliberate actions against Bulgaria. In his view, the device may simply have gone off course because of electronic warfare activity. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, for its part, stated that it did not intentionally send anything toward Bulgaria. The official Bulgarian position as of today is as follows. This is a side effect of someone else's war at our borders. Let's move on. Moldova. Today, August 9th at around 1:20 p.m. local time, near the village of Krokmaz in the Stefan Voda district, a powerful explosion occurred. Fragments of a combat drone were found at the scene. There were no casualties. Sappers and explosives experts arrived at the scene. It is reported that this is not the first such incident, because not long ago, on August 5th, in the Kahol district, fragments of a Russian Shahed drone were found. According to authorities, it was clearly carrying explosives. By the way, Moldova has previously admitted that, unfortunately, and to their great regret, they do not have radars capable of detecting such drones due to their low radar cross-section. That is, the country physically cannot track exactly what and when something enters its territory, and when and how it will explode. This only gives the Russians more room for manipulation. In this context, let me remind you that just a week earlier, Romania shot down Russian Shahed drones over its territory for 3 nights in a row, and some even entered Poland, and the Russian K-101 cruise missile, which struck a field 70 kilometers from the border. And the point is that Russian drones and missiles are increasingly, well, supposedly by accident, attacking NATO countries. With the aim of making the local population quickly grow tired of the war and start demanding that their authorities stop helping Ukraine, well, so that the war ends faster. The logic is simple. Like, supposedly Shahed drones accidentally fly in, supposedly K-101 missiles accidentally fly in. All of this is blamed on things like communication problems, electronic warfare, and so on. So, and accordingly, NATO can't announce that Russia is directly attacking alliance territory, and these kinds of incidents will keep happening until the population starts saying, listen, well, maybe we don't care anymore about what's happening in Ukraine, we need to end the war, because now it's coming our way. So let's reduce aid to Ukraine so that Kiev becomes more compliant. And by the way, in Poland, after the fall of the K-101 missile, there were already some smart guys who blamed Ukraine for the fact that a Russian missile hit their territory. They say, listen, it wasn't aimed at you. Why didn't you intercept the missile? How did you let a Russian missile cross into our territory? And here's the next case. Leipzig in Germany. Now this is much more serious. On the evening of August 4th, on the runway of Leipzig-Halle Airport in the restricted area, next to a Ukrainian cargo plane, a drone equipped with explosives and a detonator was discovered. The airport had to suspend operations for the entire night. Several flights were redirected. A separate investigation is underway into another cargo plane's collision with an unknown object while approaching the same airport. As a result, the plane sustained minor damage and landed safely at another airport. According to German media, the drone's detonator simply failed to work. And now, Germany's Interior Minister Alexander Dobrindt stated on site that the discovery of a drone with explosives represents a new level of danger. He indicated that Russia could be behind the provocation. And Western security forces are increasingly linking a series of attempts to disrupt operations or attack European infrastructure specifically to Moscow. They believe that unwashed, wild Russia may be testing NATO's ability and readiness to respond. And here I should remind you that a similar operation had already targeted Leipzig before. Let me remind you, in July 2024, an incendiary device disguised as a fire went off at the DHL logistics hub at the same airport. And this is part of a broader conspiracy that the Lithuanian prosecutor's office later linked specifically to Russian citizens with ties to the Kremlin's military intelligence. That operation was led by a GRU colonel who recruited so-called disposable agents. In other words, random people, criminals, some kind of outcasts, who commit a one-time act of sabotage for quick money and then simply disappear. And against this backdrop, the US Army officially confirmed it. Lieutenant General Charles Constanza, commander of the 5th Corps of the US Army in Europe, was relieved of command. An official US Army spokesperson stated that the circumstances of his removal remain completely unclear. Constanza had been commanding the 5th Corps since April 2024. Brigadier General John Mountford has been appointed as the acting commander. And this is where the accounts differ, because some sources claim that General Constanza's removal is not related to US Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth's broader campaign to completely shake up the top military leadership. And it doesn't have any political undertones. In other words, according to the official version, this particular removal is not part of a demonstrative purge, but something separate. But what exactly is this something? It's not explained at all. At the same time, the context around this story is still troubling, because the change happened against the backdrop of a broader restructuring of the top command. Under Hegseth, more than 24 senior officers were removed or, sidelined, often without any public explanation. And here's something important to note. The 5th Corps of the US Army is an organization with real significance for the security of Europe and even the security of Ukraine. The thing is, this corps is partially based specifically in Poland, and it coordinates US Army forces throughout Europe. And it has been playing an increasingly significant role since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, helping to coordinate American support for Kiev and managing the US military presence on NATO's eastern flank. And look, Russia starts attacking the eastern flank, and the Americans oust the commander, which looks strange. And it's important to remember that this year the Pentagon has already reduced the US military presence in Europe, and the most notable example is also related to Poland. This is the sudden cancellation of the planned deployment of the 2nd Armored Brigade Combat Team of the 1st Cavalry Division of the US Army specifically to Poland, even though the decision to deploy them was made back in May. After this cancellation caused criticism in Warsaw, President Trump personally announced that the US would still station 5,000 troops in Poland, but this time from some other brigade. Polish Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz stated in June this year that the return of American troops to the country would materialize in the coming days. But as of today, this still hasn't happened. No 5,000 American soldiers have shown up in Poland. And now Congressman Don Bacon, a Republican and member of the House Armed Services Committee, stated, and I quote, "The soldiers are just sitting there. They're trying to outweight them or something like that. I don't understand what they're doing." Notably, Bacon himself is not a random critic. He, by the way, is not running for re-election to Congress this year. And openly, without regard for party loyalty, he calls Trump's approach to Ukraine weak. And the president himself, quote, "A man who has taken a pro-Russian position and has become somewhat of an appeaser of Russia." As a result, we have a rather chaotic picture. On one hand, we have real Russian provocations against NATO infrastructure. There's the incident in Leipzig, Finland's warning about the possible use of captured Ukrainian drones. Missiles that flew into Poland and drones over Romania fit into a single pattern confirmed by Western intelligence agencies. A picture of Russia probing NATO's response. On the other hand, the dismissal of General Krim, Constanzi, was officially announced as unrelated to politics. But it is happening against the backdrop of a real purge of more than 24 senior officers and a whole year of delays with the promised reinforcement of the forces in Poland. And it is this delay that really looks like a weakening, which Warsaw and US congressmen themselves are watching with growing irritation. And at the very moment when Russia began that very probing of NATO's resolve. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like. That's all for now. Take care of yourselves. Goodbye, everyone.